Good day, everyone. I'm Ann Tedford, longtime supporter of the ICNS conference. Welcome to our latest ICNS Tech Talk on the European Strategy for Trajectory-Based Operations, or TBO. These Tech Talks are intended to encourage communication within the ICNS community throughout the year. Our annual ICNS conference is next week, April 5 through 7, at the Westin Washington Dulles. We are excited to hold the 2022 conference in person, together with a virtual platform for virtual participants. Please join us at the conference to hear from influential leaders and experts on the important policy, science, and technology issues in CNS and ATM. This year's free virtual limited registration includes real-time access to the ICNS programs, including keynotes, plenaries, and the workshop. This virtual limited registration does not include the technical program nor the technical papers. Many thanks to our sponsors for making this possible. Go to www.i-cns.org for information about the agenda and registration. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers: Olivia Nunez with the CESAR Joint Undertaking, Evan Sarasi with Eurocontrol, and Christian Pradera, the CESAR Deployment Manager. Olivia has 30+ years of aviation experience, multiple degrees. She trained as a pilot and a controller and has licenses in tower, en route, and approach. Her focus areas with CESAR are the environment, U-Space, and IFR RPAS, trajectory-based operations, virtual center, and increased flexibility and ATCO validations. Evan is a charter engineer from the French Graduate School of Computer Science and Telecommunications Engineering, specializing in data network communication. He has over 20 years experience with multiple data communications deployments, testing, and training. He is a senior expert on interoperability, managing Eurocontrol standardization for CNS, data link, airport, and ATFM areas. Christian graduated from the Polytechnic University of Madrid, specializing in rocket engines. With Eurocontrol, he's worked on the ATM master plan and now as CESAR Deployment Manager in charge of the planning activities related to the implementation of common projects, data link services, and ADS-B out. So please submit your questions for our panel members. And now, Olivia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anne, and thank you, everybody. So like Anne was saying, I work at the CESAR Joint Undertaking, now CESAR 3 Joint Undertaking. So this is, for those that don't know, maybe the secretariat of the CESAR program. So the CESAR program is the Air Traffic Management European Research and Development Program. And so to start with, I would like to give a bit of an overview of the general European TBO strategy, very much from the R&D perspective, which is the SJU perspective. Can you go to the next slide, please? So what is trajectory-based operations to start with? Well, I would say everybody has their own idea, but I think what we all agree is that this is the future trajectory management concept. It's the basis. And the basis of TBO really is, I would say, collaboration. So we're trying to move away from the old paradigm of air traffic control, just telling everybody what to do, to a more collaborative approach that is enabled by communication capabilities that were not available before. And so the way to go here is the information exchange. That's what makes collaboration possible. TBO really starts in the planning phase. And so we've done a huge amount of R&D to bring the new swim-based FFIs exchanges. And this has been packaged into what is referred to as FFIs Release 1. And so the electronic flight plan is now being deployed in Europe. So my colleague Christian from the CESAR Deployment Management will be talking about that a little bit later. And so what I want to talk about now is the work we are currently doing to bring TBO collaborative approach onto the execution phase. And so this is where we have a new actor, actually, that's air traffic control that was not there in the planning phase. And we also have new things to worry about. So we need to ensure that aircraft remain separated. We need to sequence them for landing in an efficient way. And there is, obviously less flexibility and a higher time pressure than we have in the planning phase. And it's not that we don't have time pressure in the planning phase, of course. So in Europe, we're working on 2 converging streams for TBO in the execution phase. The first very important stream is to extend these collaborative planning processes and information exchange that we have developed for the planning phase over to the execution phase. And this is what will be the FFI's release 2. And the second stream is what is kind of peculiar to the execution phase only. And it's geared on making this collaboration possible also in the European, in our case, very high density and route environment, not just for Europe, but I'm telling you a little bit the European view, where we have many flights that are actually quite short. So we have lots of flights that are, it says here on the slide, 2 to 3 hours or less, but many of them are just basically climb, very short cruise and then descend. And in this environment, we have added the focus for TBO in the direct data connection between the flight deck and the ATM ground system. And this goes way beyond the CPDLC that we have today. And this includes an upgrade, let's say, of the CPDLC to make things possible that are not possible with today's CPDLC, but also very importantly, a downlink of the information that is in the FMS. That's something completely new that was not possible before. And that is the extended projected profile. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So I would like to give a bit of a closer look at what the EPP is and what it is not, which is, the flip side. So the EPP is really the last FMS predicted trajectory. And it's not as easy as it sounds, in the sense that it's not necessarily what the aircraft will do. We look at it as the best plan with all the information we have, or better rather, with all the information the flight deck has at the time. It's the best plan that the aircraft can make. So it is the active flight plan that is downlinked, a series of points with estimates, predicted speeds, the predicted altitude at each point, and some additional information that goes with it, including even the weight of the aircraft. So a number of parameters that are really very, very useful. For interpreting the EPP, we need to do this in combination with all the other information we have on the ground. So you cannot just take it at face value and say, this is what the aircraft will do. And we, of course, need to consider also we have downlinks from the FCU, from the Flight Control Unit, or MCP, that's maybe telling you what the current speed is, what the selected flight level is, so you know what has been selected. And the EPP also contains parameters that indicate who is the flight management authority at each point. So it's going to tell you whether the flight is flying in a managed mode, so from the FMS, or is being flown from the Flight Control Unit, or MCP, using the autopilot. And this is really useful to be able to predict what the aircraft will really actually do. So the use of the managed mode is very high in the cruise phases and climb phase actually, but not so high in the descent phase. And from the research we have done, this is showing, and I'll go a bit more into detail in the next slides, that the EPP is actually very useful for doing a kind of a fast CDM-like almost optimization from the ATC perspective in real time, as well as providing very valuable information for the network, for the European network. We have a very strong network perspective in all our solutions in Europe. Just a quick operational view of the standards. I'm looking at David here, he's our maybe standards expert, but from the operational point of view, I wanted to say we actually have, the EPP is not a standalone standard. It's actually part of the overall overall data communications standard. So that includes the CPDLC as well. The EPP is a different service, if you like, system to system. That's the ADSC, not the old ADSC, let's say, that's in use in the ocean, but the new ADSC. And it includes time constraints as well. And the versions of the subsequent versions, that we have are the first one in 2014, that was, already actually very comprehensive. And a later version in 2017 actually included some improvements to the EPP, both from the operational perspective. Something maybe worth mentioning is that it includes the plant stabilization speed, which is information on what the aircraft plans in terms of last speed. As you may know, in Europe, we have very bad weather and not so much visual adjustment as in other parts of the world. And this stabilization speed is very, very useful for air traffic control to be able to see how close aircraft can be put when we're talking here when aircraft cannot actually perform any kind of visual separation between them. And all these standards will also include the CPDLC component, so the uplink. So we are including more and more, because the concept is it includes both the uplink and the downlink. You cannot see one without the other. And so the 2017 version also includes the interval management, CPDLC clearances, and the dynamic RMP, which I have to say, the dynamic RMP is something we have not yet researched in Europe, even though it's definitely a very interesting standard. And just to highlight, there is a third version of the standards that's under development as we speak, that actually is going to incorporate, from the operational perspective, information on the flight path authority changes from a contract perspective, so that you will be able to ask to have a contract, so that any change will be uplinked, downlinked immediately, so that the air traffic control always knows in real time who is controlling the flight path. And also maybe holding profile is also something that's under discussion. So we have a huge uncertainty in terms of how an aircraft will be holding, and that requires buffers. So we want to move towards tighter containment of the whole trajectories. So that's also something really interesting that may become in the new standards. So next slide, please. Looking a little bit closer at the applications we have today. So the initial trajectory information sharing, that's mandated in Europe and under deployment, already deployed in the Maastricht Control Center, is something that Christian will be talking about a little bit more in detail later, so I won't talk about that anymore. That's just to say, also something that's already used in Maastricht today, and I think Evan will be showing actually the screenshots of the pictures about the Maastricht, is the EPP contains information on the top of descent, and it's been assessed that this knowledge actually can support controllers in providing the descent start to closer to what the optimum is as calculated from the FMS. And early descent is actually a huge cause for inefficiencies in Europe. We have many aircraft descending 35, 40, 50, up to 80 miles before top of descent. And it's not a secret that this is extra fuel burn that we want to eliminate as much as possible. And the potential for improvement actually was already highlighted in the last data collection that we had with thousands of flights in PJ 31, and work continues in ongoing PJ 38. Maybe to highlight, all these projects actually have publicly available reports that are available for anyone to downlink, with hundreds of pages with quite some detail on what they have done. Next slide, please. Now on to what we're working now in the research. So maybe a very exciting application that we think has huge potential is the enhanced vertical clearances. This is looking actually at using the EPP information to help the ground system automatically compose an uplink for a vertical clearance for the aircraft with constraints along the way. It would be a little bit like a custom, if you like, tailored departure or arrival, if you like, in which you could say climb 380, cross this point 250 above, this point 280 above, this point 290 below, whatever. And you can have as many as you like. So something that would not be feasible really via voice. And typically today will be managed by controllers by clearing the aircraft to the immediate, the last available flight level that's clear. And then, when the aircraft reaches, they will call you. So we are reaching 280 and, requesting further climb. And then you look and then you've wasted some time and the aircraft sometimes, ends up leveling off. So we believe this has, and this is what our research is showing, huge potential to improve actually dramatically the efficiency of the vertical profiles in busy airspace. And all this is, like I said before, really linked to the auto load into the FMS of these clearances. This is not something that can be managed manually. And the other side of this is also the uplink of the 2D trajectory revision. So today, for aircraft that are established in the en route and also climb and descent, but especially in the en route, many conflicts are solved by vector and resume. So you vector the aircraft when they are cleared, the separation is ensured, then you can tell the aircraft to resume on navigation. This is two communications, and it has some unpredictability there for the flight deck, especially if they're descending, in terms of how long this vector is going to be. And so the 2D trajectory revision uplinked directly and then auto-loaded onto the FMS, and then the FMS downlinking that this is correctly implemented is also showing great potential in terms of improvement of the loop between the air and the ground. And next slide, please. So the challenge for us is, of course, we need a huge increase in air-ground data traffic to be supported technically. So I'm an operational expert, so this is more for my technical colleagues, but just to say, we are aware of this challenge and we have done a huge amount of work. The vision is to go towards the update of the air-ground communications in a phased way, and with a principle of backwards compatibility and using ground gateways for the ground multilink. So we kind of think that we want to move away from the idea of the aircraft being multiple equipped for multiple things. So the aircraft is equipped and the ground will provide service. And as we move on, new aircraft will be equipped with better communications, and this will allow them to get better services. So the coexistence of air-ground communications technologies you see here on the slides, I don't need to read, but there is a lot of variability. You have VDL2, OSI, IPS, Aeromax, SATCOM Class A and Class B, and we have a lot of work and expert in TRL6 already in the LDACs, the future terrestrial, we call data link, but actually not so terrestrial, because we already have plans to move this onto the satellite with low Earth orbit satellites that would make it available even in oceanic and remote areas. And to say LDACs is also something that will provide an integrated solution. So we have surveillance and so it's not just communication and navigation as a backup, if you like. So we have research on all this. And as well, the LDACs provides a voice solution that I'll be talking about just very briefly now. So next slide, please. So if you can click again, because it seems like there was oops. Well, it seems like the text is gone, never mind. So digital voice actually can be sent via LDACs. So over LDACs, based on IP, if you like, on voice over IP protocol. And this is we're talking here of a voice service that would be comparable in terms of performance to VHF. And so the latency would be about, the 170 milliseconds. So you can actually have a conversation. It's not like the sat voice that we have in today, which is very useful, and it has a good function, but we're talking here of really a different animal. The idea here and why this is linked to TBO is, well, first, we're talking generally about ground communications here. The idea of TBO is to move towards data link, but voice will remain and will, if you like, will be reduced. And at the same time, a problem we have in Europe is we don't have any frequencies to open new sectors. And so this would provide a relief in one way, but also, digital voice has a huge operational flexibility. To start with, you can share, you're sharing here the spectrum between voice and data link. This means that as data link use goes up and voice goes down, you're not wasting spectrum by having dedicated spectrum for the voice. But at the same time, it allows, for example, transparent handover from one controller to the next. So the pilot, let's say, so the aircraft is connected to air traffic control voice and data link, and the handover happens transparently from one controller to the next. So there is no need for any change or action on the flight crew side. And at the same time, it provides possibilities in terms of choosing whether you want to actually have party line or not. It will depend on, it's an operational choice that can be made at ATCO level or at facility level. So it's not imposed like we have today in VHF. Everyone has to listen to everybody. You can have access control to avoid, if you don't want to have party line, but you want to avoid simultaneous communication. So it is really very versatile compared to the VHF. And, this is, like I say, long-term, but I just wanted to give you a heads up of the kind of work that we have in CESAR, looking a bit more into the long-term. And that was my last slide. Thank you very much. I hand over now back to you, Anne. Or Greg, I don't know. Or Christian.
I think I can take it from here, Olivia. Thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, or even good evening to everyone, depending where you are. And thanks for joining this talk. As I was introduced before, I am working in the CESAR Deployment Manager, so also under the CESAR umbrella, like Olivia. But while she is focused on the R&D activities in the CESAR 3 joint undertaking, the CESAR Deployment Manager is focused on the implementation and deployment activities. And I am responsible of the plans, addressing in particular 6 ATM functionalities that are mandated, regulated in Europe. Therefore, the stakeholders have to implement them by a given deadline because it is a European law. And I am the responsible in the SDM drafting the plans so that the stakeholders can meet those functionalities in time. One of them is addressing ADSE EPP, so very much linked to TBO as enabling trajectory-based operations, but also one different ATM functionality in the regulation is SWIM, System-Wide Information Exchange, which includes a number of FFIs Release 1 services. If we move to the next slide, we will see this. I'm going to give you an overview of the European deployment perspective, what is being implemented today, enabling trajectory-based operations, and what is in the deployment pipeline in the short term. All these elements, as I mentioned before, are subject to a European regulation. You can see there the IR number 116 from 2021 is a very recent regulation. And this is mandating with different timelines the implementation of FFIs, flight and flow information in a collaborative environment, release 1, as you will see in a while. It is also mandating the implementation of SWIM, System-Wide Information Management, which in the end is a concept of standards, infrastructure, and governance, enabling the management of ATM-related information and its exchange between the stakeholders through interoperable services. And then finally, the ADSE EPP that Olivia has already explained and detailed very well. I will give you an overview of what is the status in Europe today and what are the short-term plans for these three key elements. Let's move to the next slide, please. So starting with FFIs, and I have the feeling that some text is missing here also. Okay, it's coming. Yes, perfect. Now it is complete, the slide. Thank you, Greg. So FFIs, as I said, this is part of the regulation, but only the release one, which is matured for deployment. The FFIs is an ICAO concept. The release 2 is being still developed under ICAO, and there's also R&D activities ongoing. So what is today being implemented through the CP1, through the regulation in Europe, is only some services of the FFIs release 1. This is a key enabler for TBO, and it can be seen as a first step to move towards FFIs release 2 in the future, which will address the real negotiation and the execution phase of the flight plans. FFIs introduces a new common data format, FIXM, compared to the previous 2012 flight plan edition, which will allow digitalization of all the flight information and will allow including a huge set of data, of flight information and aeronautical information data that will serve the purposes of 4D trajectories and will allow the SPS users to submit their electronic flight plans in a digital manner with the right security levels and in an interoperable way with the other SPS users, network manager, and ANSPs. And this will ensure a harmonized and transversal view of the flight plans among the different ATM stakeholders. One of the key elements that the electronic flight plan will include as part of FFI's release 1 is the GUFI, the Global Unique Flight Identifier, which will allow all the stakeholders to identify clearly, anonymously, the flight that is under concern. On the left side of the picture, you can see the services that are being implemented today in Europe. And in the next slide, you will see that there are still a lot of plans and activities ongoing to deploy them. They have to be ready by December 2025. So there is still time to have them all implemented by the ANSPs, SPS users, and the Eurocontrol Network Manager. However, Eurocontrol Network Manager has already achieved the implementation of most of those services. Only the publication service is not yet available through SWIM, but it will be ready by end of this year. The fill-in service through which the SPS users will be able to fill in the electronic flight plans, the trial service, which is an option for the SPS users to assess through a what-if scenario how the flight plan could be affected subject to different constraints. The notification service and the flight data request service are all available through the SWIM registry by Eurocontrol Network Manager. The SPS users and the ANSPs in Europe still have to upgrade their systems to be able to fill in the electronic flight plan and also to process and read the new data that the electronic flight plan will provide to the air navigation service providers. I will not go too much into the FFI release 2 because, as I said, it is not in the deployment pipeline yet. It is the long-term vision, let's say. It is subject to ICAO's development and decision, but obviously the release 1 can be seen as a first step or intermediate step to move towards FFI release 2. Okay, I already mentioned that FFI's release 2 is focused on the post-departure and the negotiation and execution phase, whilst the release 1 is focused on the pre-departure and flight planning and filling. Let's move then to the next slide, because all these FFI's release 1 services will be implemented through system-wide information management, SWIM, which will allow interoperability among all the stakeholders who are making use of these services, and will also ensure digitalization and automation of all these services. As I said before, almost all the services are available already in the SWIM registry in Europe by Eurocontrol Network Manager, and now the SPS users and the ANSPs will have to upgrade their systems to be able to process the electronic flight plan and to make use of these SWIM services provided by Eurocontrol Network Manager. On the right side, you can see that almost all the European countries who are mandated through the regulation appear in yellow with no implementation yet. However, there are plans already ongoing. You can see on the left side on the pie chart that more than 1/4 of the ANSPs have plans already to upgrade their systems. Hungary Control in Hungary has actually already started the implementation, and the others are still not planning the implementation. But as I said, the target date is December 2025. There is still time. It is the right moment to start developing plans, and the SESAR deployment manager is monitoring closely the situation with all those ANSPs to ensure that the plans will be viable, if not this year, next year, and the implementation for this FFI's Release 1 and SWIM services can start next year. Let's move to the next slide, where I will tackle the ADS EPP. I have already talked about FFIs and SWIM. The third element that I wanted to describe today is EPP. What is the status of implementation? And again, likewise, for ADSE EPP, we have a mandate in the Common Project 1 regulation that is requesting the ANSPs and the SPS users to have the ADSE EPP capability. On the airborne side, it is a forward fit mandate. So only the new aircraft being delivered from 1st January 2028 are requested to have the capability to downlink the extended projected profile, whilst the ANSPs on the ground, they are requested to have the capability to receive and process the EPP data by December 2027. But not only that, they will have to display the new calculated trajectory thanks to the EPP, as Olivia explained, to the air traffic controllers, and the systems will have to display also warnings in cases of discrepancies between the new calculated trajectory by the FMS, thanks to the EPP, compared to the calculated or predicted trajectory by the ground systems. When there are discrepancies, the ATCOs will have warnings to ensure that there are no hazards or risks of collisions. On top of that, Eurocontrol Network Manager is also requested by 2027 to make use of the EPP to enhance the flow of management. And finally, on the ground side, the ANSPs are also requested to distribute the EPP that is being downlinked from the aircraft to the adjacent air traffic service units, so that all the units involved in the management of the flight have the same information in real time. Let's move to the next slide, where I try to depict the concept in a visual way. I will not insist very much on the concept because Olivia has already explained how the ADSE EPP works, but basically what is mandated and what is being implemented in Europe from now until 2027 is the onboard equipment to have the capability to downlink the EPP to the ground systems with all the data contained in the EPP. This will allow the ground systems to receive the actual trajectory flown by the aircraft and the predicted trajectory calculated by the FMS. And as you can see on the bottom, on the ground system, the center that is receiving the EPP will distribute it to the naviors, the adjacent units, as I said, so that everybody is up to date and has the same level of information, the same EPP. And you can see also their network manager, Eurocontrol, receiving the data. Okay, I think that this is for the three key elements. I have one more slide, if I'm not wrong, for additional enablers linked to trajectory-based operations. This is a roadmap that shows all the technological enablers allowing or facilitating trajectory-based operations one way or another on the airborne and ground domains, with different dates. You can see here a clear vertical line in 2027, which is the deadline of the CP1 regulation. As I said, a forward fit mandate for the SPS users from 1st January 2028 onwards to equip the aircraft, and December 2027 for the ANSPs to have the ADSE EPP capability. There is also an important milestone in December 2023, which is a sort of maturity checkpoint, where the European Commission will assess the maturity of all these concepts to be sure that the implementation can progress adequately and be materialized by 2027. On top of this diagram, you can see the airborne domain, the ADSC EPP capability, which is affecting the aircraft manufacturers, Airbus, Boeing, Embraer, etc. Again, all the new aircraft being delivered in 2028 and flying in Europe above flight level 285 will have to have this capability. Then on the airborne ground domain, the air-ground communication segment, Olivia has already mentioned a number of technologies that either are in the pipeline of deployment, like SATCOM, for example, which is becoming mature to be implemented as from next year, or other technologies in the long term, like LDACs, that in principle, once they are mature, will be also implemented in Europe. Then you have the ground domain for the ground-ground communication segment, where Europe is working on the establishment of a single data link service provider and implementing a common European ATM backbone. Because as you know, Europe is quite fragmented. There are many different countries with their own ANSPs. The idea is to have a single data link service provider eventually, and this is planned to be viable or to be ready by 2025. And then finally, on the ground domain for the ATM segment, I have already mentioned what the ANSPs will have to do, which is to receive and process the EPP data, to upgrade their systems, to provide the new trajectory, the new calculated trajectory to the air traffic controllers, and also warnings in case of discrepancy with the ground calculated trajectory. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much again, everybody, for your time. And now I will hand over to Ivan.
Thank you, Olivia and Christian. So good day to everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. So I'm Evan Sarazi from Eurocontrol, and in this part I'll try and focus a bit on what we're trying to do in terms of supported deployment and actually where we stand as we speak. Next slide, please. So the first key message for you all is yes, we've done the R&D, we've done the planning, and we have deployed. These are actually screenshots of the Eurocontrol Upper Airspace Center in Maastricht, where you see here on their HMI, the visuals they have in terms of the downlinked information that they get from EPP. And you see there in the middle, the number of waypoints that are actually received in EPP. So we're much more quite a lot of waypoints will be communicated in the EPP message. And on the right, you will see obviously a discrepancy between what the pilot has in his system encoded and what we have in terms of knowledge on the ground in terms of flight planning. And obviously, as Olivia said there, you see the top of descent information there on the screen, which is very valuable for the operational people and a real bonus for them in their daily tasks. Next slide, please. So that was Maastricht, but we have a really long journey now to actually bring this in operation across Europe. And for this, we rely heavily on trying to harmonize and support deployment initiatives to support the goals that are set in the regulation that Christian exposed. And what we try to aim for is at network level to have a implementation program. This screenshot has gone a bit funny, but basically we're looking at the supporting on data link, where there we're trying to support current operations and try and improve things, but also where we plan to team up with the CESAR deployment manager and make sure that the milestones and the mandate are met in the context of the ADSC EPP project. Next slide, please, then. So what does this support actually mean? So we have seen that the standards are there. We have seen that the position are actually being implemented with the EPP. We have the regulation, the mandate. So what do we need to do on top of all of that? Well, it's quite clear that the standards available have been prepared by KO, RTCA, EuroK, and they're widely available. We're using the HSB2 standard set, as Olivia said, for EPP, very different to what we see on the North Atlantic, for example. So what do we need to do on top of that? Well, as Christian showed in his extract of the regulation, it's not very prescriptive in terms of how we actually distribute the data on the ground once it's received from over-the-air ground link. And this is something where we need to actually put in some energy to make sure we're effective in what we do. And in this respect, we have a key component that will help us in bringing this forward and maybe expediting the implementation of EPP and its widespread use is a common service, an ADSC common service. So in terms of our timeline, well, basically, a lot of things are expected to happen before the end of 2023 to make this ADSC common service become a reality. That means that when data comes to the ground, we will have to this common service, we will have to then distribute this data throughout Europe. And for that purpose, we're using system-wide information management. We're actually using a technical standard that's called the SWIM yellow profile. And we're going to use that interface to actually distribute the EPP payload from the ADSC common service, which will be the endpoint of the ADSC connection, to the actual centers and other users that are legitimate users of EPP data. So this may be procured, as Christoph mentioned, the common data link service provider. These are things that we're actually looking at. Obviously, we have a lot of feedback already from operations in Maastricht that we have to share to our colleagues in order to also expedite their implementation and help them also improve their integration of EPP. And this guidance is something that will be living as over time. These are things that we learn as we progress throughout Europe. And obviously, as Christian alluded to, for FFIS Release 1, we're actually in the process of documenting the procedures that are supporting the submission of such flight plans. Beyond 2024, when we have basically finished with the specification work for this common service, we then need to think a bit further in terms of how we actually go to prepare the deployment of HSB2 as a whole. So this is well beyond CP1, and it takes time to actually prepare this. It's not something that you actually do very quickly. We know, all of us, how long it took to get data link up and running. And in this context there, we have new things and things that we've done before in B1, such as, for example, harmonizing a message set for B1. We need to do the same for B2. Olivia alluded to new radio link technologies, new wideband solutions. We need to benefit of those implementations in order to actually support the rollout of new HSB2 services. Research also has led to the identification of new ADSC contracts. These need to be fed into the standards at some point beyond 2024, so we can start actually bringing them into reality. And then eventually, we need to also consider how we will progress FFIS Release 2. Next slide, please. So our immediate needs, and this is between now and the end of 2023, is to make sure that we have everything necessary to have an efficient implementation of the regulation that Christian mentioned. Christian mentioned forfeiting of aircraft by the beginning of 2028. Sorry, yes, correct. But everything has to be prepared in advance on the ground in terms of receiving the data, distributing the data, and making sure the positions are equipped, the staff are trained. And this is why we have this milestone of 2023 to complete the specification of a common service. Obviously, first we have to look at this in terms of a ConOps. How actually do we integrate an ADSC common service with regard to the current implementation of the data link services, and how efficiently can we actually distribute this data? So on the left, you see an awful lot of standards are available, and on the right, what we expect to deliver between now and the end of 2023. First, the SWIM interface specification for data distribution, and the definition of a common service, a common ADSC common service. Next slide, please. So what do we look at in terms of guidance? Well, for this type of activities, we're looking for guidance material that are focused on operational stakeholders, practical guidelines for actually ANSPs, the network manager, pilots, which addresses the need to connect to, and so on. So there are actual targeted guidance material for the different stakeholders. Then in terms of ANSPs, obviously we are learning as we progress with implementation. The standards already have quite a lot of content in regard to operational displays and warnings, but through operational experience, we've actually learned more. Sometimes what's in the standard is sufficient. Sometimes it can be complemented or maybe insufficient, and then we'll enhance those initially through guidance, and then we will go back to the standards organizations, maybe to fine-tune those standards in a future revision. Also, Olivia mentioned something very important, that we expect to use multiple radio data links in the future for wideband. We need to be prepared. And although it may sound very much plug and play, it's not sometimes invisible to the controller. And in some cases, the controller needs to be aware of the capabilities of the aircraft under his control. And there may be limitations with regard to ATNB1, ATSB2, and this also has an impact on maybe the message sets to be using, and this needs to be displayed and visualized on his HMI, so he knows what he's dealing with. So this is all part of guidance that we will develop over time. Next slide, please. So I talked about an ADSC common service, and this slide tries to depict what actually that entails in terms of impact on the ground. On the left, we see the classical way that we have arranged things for data link today. We have an initial logon from the flight deck to the ground. We initiate CPDLC, and between the different centers in Europe on the ground, we have a ground forwarding of that logon information so that the crew does not have to re-log on every time. This is called a LOF message. And basically it goes along in a sequence as the plane progresses through the airspace. Tomorrow, when we will bring in a common service, we do have a bit of a change in how the data flows operate. The CPDLC traffic data flows will continue to go between center to center, but the ADSC traffic will actually go through a single common service system or server, whatever term you prefer or most comfortable with. And from that single location, it will be forwarded on the ground to the EPP recipients, such as an ANSP center. So we have a disconnect between the data flows, which is not actually well catered for in the current standards. And that actually is something we have to think about. It has an effect on logon. To whom do we initiate the logon? Is it first to the common servers or is it to the center? So all these things we need to think about. On the ground, obviously, if we have a new entrant, such as this common service for ADSC data, it needs to be also informed of the logon status. So again, a new type of information flow between our ground systems in order to make everybody aware of the logon status of the aircraft flying in the airspace. Next slide, please. And this would be my final slide. And we often, engineers, get carried away with communications and radios and bits and performance and KPIs, and we often forget some essentials. The aerospace users have made it very clear to us that they don't want their EPP data to go into public domain. They would prefer that that data actually remains within the aviation community and is used by those who actually should be using it in order to deliver operational benefits. And this means that we need to ensure that through a non-disclosure agreement, for example, that we will honor that request, and when the data comes, that it's not going to go into public domain. In the absence of a common service, on the left, that could mean to an incredible number of NDAs between the different airline operators, the centers, and then between the centers and third parties. So we could have a double layer of many-to-many arrangements. To give you an idea, in Maastricht, for example, we already have 6 NDAs in place, and just one center in initial operations. So you can imagine what it means later on when we deal with a lot of centers and airlines. On the right, you see there what the benefit of having an ADSC common service from this perspective. In that case, we can have a many-to-one and a one-to-many arrangement where the ADSC common service provider is actually a kind of intermediate broker managing all these contracts on behalf of everybody. so we could enter into a more contractual license arrangement and honor the request of the airline community. So there in a nutshell, I tried to give you some insight into what we're doing in terms of the short term and how we see the long term initiatives in terms of supporting the pan-European deployment of the regulatory objectives, and as Olivia was saying, in terms of our long-term R&D, bringing that into operations. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you to you all Olivia, Evan, and Christian. That was a marvelous discussion of trajectory-based operations. While you all take a moment to think, I will note that at our conference next week, our Thursday mornings from our European colleagues. All right, questions. So Christian, you talked about the mandate to equip ADSC and EPP on board the aircraft that are flying in Europe. I guess the question is, do you think that the manufacturers will be able to have the equipment available in time?
Right, thanks for the question. And well, first thing I have to say is that today there are already several aircraft from Airbus, mainly A320s, with a capability on board. They were participating in the SESAR demonstrations under the R&D projects managed by the SJU, together with a number of ANSPs, including Maastricht, MUAC, who is already operational using the EPP data, as Evan explained. And those aircraft already have the capability, and we are in close contact with Airbus, of course, but also with other manufacturers like Boeing or Embraer to understand what are their plans, their challenges, difficulties, etc. We are confident that Airbus will make it in time. Throughout our coordination with Boeing and Embraer, we understand that it's not that easy. It is a complex matter. Also, it is implying huge investments from their sides to adapt the FMS. However, we believe that there is still time enough to ensure that they have solid plans to meet the objective in Europe. One of the key elements that was brought out through these discussions with the manufacturers was that, well, ADSC EPP is just one application of ATSB2. ATSB2 contains more services like CPDLC version 2, for example, and the manufacturers would prefer to implement ATSB2 at one shot. From a business perspective, it makes all the sense. However, the regulation in Europe is mandating EPP by 2027 on the ground, and as I said, forward fit mandate from 2028 onwards. We are in close coordination with the manufacturers. We know that they are also doing their best to make it feasible, and we believe there is still time to make it in time. We are in 2022, so until 2028, there are still 6 years, and we are confident, but we also acknowledge at the same time the difficulties and challenges, especially with the late crisis that we have been all suffering with the COVID and now with the war, that there may be difficulties, but we will continue monitor the situation with them, and hopefully by 2028, they will be ready.
Okay. I know you talked that this was a forward fit requirement. Can you or maybe somebody else address the challenge to the controllers of a mixed equipage environment? Or not?
Maybe Olivia. This is more an operational issue.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I have been a controller for 20 years. So I think maybe I can say, you know, in all our R&D, we have been in a mixed equipage environment. And, you know, it is indeed a challenge. The mandate actually is requesting, like Christian explained, specifically the the simplest application, which is the fact that you can see the EPP, the raw EPP, if you like, on the radar, the screen, and you will get a warning if there is a discrepancy between the trajectory that the ground has and what is being downlinked in 2D. Yeah, it wouldn't be possible to do something like that 3D. And so whatever information is available is good. We foresee that the aircraft that have the APP will have better descent profiles because of the top of descent. This is, like I said, one of the expected benefits. But eventually, it is true that as far as what is the next step, which is the improvement in the ground TP, you cannot trust the ground TP in the same way if you have an EPP behind it or you don't. And so to get the full benefit, we'll have to wait until this ramps up and we have a higher level of aircraft equipage. But this is the start. So we expect some benefits to start with. This is called initial trajectory information sharing. And then, as things pick up, we'll get more. In particular, maybe I can mention for the enhanced vertical clearances, these will only be available for equipped aircraft. And that's it. So we are going to get into an environment in which controllers are already used to having to deal with different aircraft in different ways. So these very very advanced and very useful clearances will only be available because it is just not possible to do the same thing for non-equipped aircraft. And human performance is actually at the heart of all our R&D. And so the mixed equipage is a challenge, and we have a lot of research behind it. Thank you.
I don't mean to trip you up. I just know that in all of my time with the FAA, the equipage issue, not just getting the people to equip, but how do you deal with it during that transition period is probably the most challenging thing that we have to deal with. So
absolutely.
It wasn't a trick question, really. Let's see here now. How about maybe this is something for Evan to answer about the benefits of deploying ADC, ADS-C common services with respect to communication?
Yes, that's a great question, Anne, because I didn't actually point to that benefit in the presentation. In fact, the one of the elements of the standard for ATSB2 is the fact that the ground and the aircraft can support multiple ADS-C connections in parallel at the same time. And obviously that comes with a penalty in terms of spectrum utilization. So the fact that we're using, and especially if you consider multiple centers maybe doing the same thing at the same time, it can get quite large. So the advantage of having an ADS-C common service is to actually make sure that we minimize the number of connections on the air-ground segment. As you're probably all aware, with VDL2, we have congestion issues. It's difficult to manage, it's a delicate balance. But even if we are in a wideband framework, it's good practice nowadays to be efficient in using spectrum. And this is also a bonus with the ADS-C common service approach.
Okay, great, thank you. I wanted to share that we received basically a comment, not really a question. This person is a student and they've been inspired by these presentations. They think that these talks are the deep dive that the industry needs, and they want to thank all of the presenters and the hosts today. Keep up the good work. Excuse me, keep up the great work with the deep discussion and the global view. The industry needs this. More, please. Thank you. So, well, thank you for your comment. We're glad to hear that these are fruitful to all. They're certainly fruitful to me. So there's a question here, I guess, about, when is Europe going to switch to ATN IPS?
Okay, maybe I'll give an answer to that. So I've worked many years with ICAO supporting the development of 18 IPS, and on the European side, we can say we already deployed 18 IPS, but on the ground. We're actually one of the first actually to make use of IP data networking solutions cross-border for ground applications. So basically the thinking in Europe on 18 IPS is really to associate it to a new radio link solution that is more robust in terms of its spectrum availability and in terms of its wideband, I would say, context. And we're already suffering with video mode 2. So we associate any major technical change, such as 18 IPS on the airground segment, to a new radio solution, as Olivia presented in her slides.
Okay, great. I'd also like to mention that I think it was our last tech talk was by Greg Ciccone with Boeing, and he gave a talk about the,
yeah, I remember Greg.
On IPS. So that's available on the i-cns.org website if one still needs more information about IPS. It was a
yeah, and definitely with Greg, we worked together on that IPS dialogue service, and really that's something we also strongly recommend from our side.
I just figure connecting dots is always hard.
Yes.
Well, I sort of addressed this when I talked about the other demonstrations for TBO, but maybe I'll go back to Christian and say, are there other deployment coordination activities with regions outside of EU? And what's the status of that?
Yeah, sure. In Europe, we have a memorandum of cooperation with the FAA. So there is a lot of coordination with America. On the R&D side, my colleague Olivia and the CESAR joint undertaking is in charge of that coordination, but also on the deployment side, the CESAR deployment manager is in contact with its counterpart in the FAA. And one of the topics that we are coordinating is TBO and SWIM implementation, with the main goal or objective of ensuring interoperability and harmonization. That is the key objective of this memorandum of cooperation between EU and America. So yes, the answer is yes. At least with the FAA, there is a very good collaboration spirit and coordination where all these topics are being addressed regularly, at least twice a year. And we try to synchronize and harmonize the implementation of these technical elements and assess also where there are differences or gaps to understand whether there could be some mitigation actions.
So are they still identified as action plans? Action plan number such and such, or did they?
Yes.
Sorry, it's been many years since I worked for the FAA, but some things don't change. So glad to see that it continues because that coordination is very important. So I don't know, maybe we can talk a little bit about CPDLC version 2, the use cases and its operational benefits. So I don't know who's.
Yeah, maybe that's for me. Maybe to stress again, like Christian said, that the European mandate does not include the CPDLC v2, but some manufacturers are choosing to move forward with this as a package. It's not like autoload is necessarily linked to CPDLC v2. You can do autoload if you like with CPDLC v1, and you can do it, but it's not like required. Whereas in CPDLC v2, it's really embedded in the concept, and that's where we see the benefit. And in Europe we have known these clearances that we can do now with CPDLC v2 have been collectively, informally, become known as the complex clearances. And the idea is that they're long and they allow you to do things that you could not do with voice. And this maybe the operational benefit, I think, somehow there is an element of controller workload, if you like, for instance, in the clearance that I mentioned in the vector and resume. So nowadays you can say, well, I'll give you this vector and then I'll monitor, and when you're separated, I will send you to resume on navigation. So pretty much there is very little uncertainty in that sense once you give a vector. So there is really no need to leave the resume for later. And actually, once you have uplinked it, if it's auto-loaded into the FMS, you have more guarantee that it will be followed than with the vector, which is just a heading, which depends on when the aircraft turn or doesn't turn, and what the wind is. You have to be aware as a controller of the wind always when you vector aircraft, because you give a heading and there is the wind correction is not there. But maybe to say in the vertical domain, this is a bit more extreme. Because there is a lot of dialogue today on the frequency. If you listen to the ATC frequency, which level can you be at this point, that the controllers will ask. But this is, if you like, a lot of work. Can you cross this point at flight level 350 or not? And then they look into the FMS and they will tell you yes or no, or maybe, and or they will say, well, maybe we can do 330, and then you clear the aircraft. So all that will be gone. Because with the enhanced vertical clearances, we already know what the aircraft can do because the APP has told us, and then the clearance comes, is composed automatically, and then the controller can verify and uplink it. So there is here a double benefit. There is the controller workload reduction, but also it allows us to do things that we would never do before, because with this kind of dialogue, you can do one level and one specific. In Europe, we have a lot of what level can you cross the boundary, so that the border with the next ACC, I guess it's the same everywhere. You can only do so much, but you would not be able to compose a complex clearance with 4, because that would require, can you do 280 here, 290 here, and 350? It's just too long. And so the benefit is in terms of controller workload, but also very much in terms of flight efficiency, of avoiding these intermediate clearances that end up being, you lose precious time if you have an intermediate clearance, because maybe the controller says, well, I'll clear 280, and if it's okay, I will clear. But then you get someone else calls at the time, the aircraft already levels off, and then it's too late to provide that second clearance. And so all that will be gone.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much. I don't think we have any more questions right now. So my greatest appreciation for the three of you in this talk. I know it's not so easy to talk to the strangers in the audience. So thanks again. I also want to thank my co-host, Greg Deeds of Autonomy Association. He's the one who produces these talks, so we appreciate that. And then I hope to see you at next week's conference, or maybe you can sign in virtually. As a reminder, the plenary session on Thursday morning, if you haven't had your fill of TBO, is entitled Multi-Regional TBO Demonstration, and it focuses on US and several Asian states. So check www.i-cns.org for information. Thank you all for listening. Have a good day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.